This meeting is being recorded.
Welcome everyone to the Hunter Living Histories meeting for this Monday, the 4th of July, 2022. I'd like to acknowledge that we're beaming into you from the University of Newcastle, which is a Wabakal country, and we pay our respects to elders both past, present, and those yet to be. And we also pay our respects to the traditional custodians of the lands that you're all beaming into us today through Zoom, and pay our respects to Indigenous and Aboriginal people that are joining us today for this meeting. And as the open invite, if there's anything that's spoken of at this meeting that needs an Indigenous or Aboriginal check, just come in and do the check and put your 2 bobs worth in. Very proud to also come into you on Naidoc week. So it started yesterday. We had a wonderful start at the Civic Theatre, and there'll be a bit more on that later in the showcase. So anyway, thanks for joining us today. The theme this year of Naidoc week is Get Up, Stand Up, Show Up. So I'd like to thank you all for showing up. And do we have any apologies for today, Anne?
The only apology we have is from Professor Linda Ryan.
Okay. Well, we saw her yesterday, so
we did.
All the best to Professor Linda Ryan. All right, so on to our first guest. So we've got 3, possibly 4 guests today. And our first is Professor Hugh Craig, who is wearing some wonderful Ugg boots, which he refuses to show us. But he will be speaking on the time-layered cultural map of Australia. Over to you, Hugh, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm speaking from Gringai country, Dungog, I believe land of thinly wooded hills is the translation. So thanks so much for letting me present on the time-layered cultural map of Australia. That's the landing page you can see there at tlcmap.org. But if you Google TLC-MAP, that's all you need to get there. TLC Map is a mapping platform launched in 2019, based at the University of Newcastle, a place to create digital maps and publish digital maps online. It's open access, entirely free. You need to register to create a map, but that is just a matter of entering some details and waiting for a confirmation email. So this is kind of an invitation to try out TLC Map. If we go on, please, and to the next slide. Making a digital map starts with a spreadsheet like this. And this is what you might call a minimum viable mapping spreadsheet. We have a list of titles or labels you can see on the left, latitude and longitude. That's basically all you need for a map, and then those points will appear on the map. We've also on this occasion got a URL which will take you back to the source of the item. So this is a list of the locations of photos taken by commercial travelers around Australia in the 1920s and 30s, and that's where that link will take you to. So it's kind of like a sample. Let's see if we can map, or let's see what happens when we map some of these items. So you could go on to the next one, please. So we've uploaded that spreadsheet into TLC Map, and this is what you get. The items now appear as orange points on the map. you know, they're now projected onto a map. And if you click one of them, which I have for the purposes of this slide here, it's not clickable, unfortunately, but I'll show you what happens when you click it. So you click on the point, and that brings up the information from that record. And the idea of obviously basically mapping, and we like to say, you know, everyone loves a map, etc. It's just a nice way to present, a nice intuitive way to present information. And in this case, it's an alternative to, say, browsing through a website to find particular photos, or, you know, looking at them in categories, etc. And then if we imagine we're clicking on that link, we'll go on to the next slide. You click onto that link, and that takes you to the source, which is University of Melbourne Archives. This is the site where they are, where they live, as it were, these photos. And then you can click on that image if you couldn't. Next slide, please, Anne. And then finally you get to the actual photo, which is one of these taken by a commercial traveller. I'm not sure when, 1920s, 1930s. This is Picnic Point in Toowoomba, and there's a whole collection of it. So the map is a nice way to arrange, give access to this set of resources. Okay, so that's one what we call a map layer, one map layer that we've got on TLC map. If we go on to the next one, okay, another spreadsheet to be the basis of a map. This time it's data about community music groups, and Helen English, of one of my colleagues at Newcastle, is preparing this as part of her DECRA fellowship. And this time it's collecting information about various community music groups, so that you could, and putting them on a map so that you can see what is happening near to you. Okay, if we go to the next one, next slide. So this is how they appear on the map. And if you click on that Evoca one, the U3A, it gives you a description. It'll tell you when it's on, cost you a gold coin. They're going to play ukuleles Tuesdays 2 to 4, etc. So if you were an Evoca, obviously you'd be happy about that and could go along or see what else is. And Helen's also going to look at where do these, use the map as she builds it up to see where are their clusters of music communities, and why, and where are their absences, and so on. And she's got great plans for this to be part of, like, what they call social prescriptions in the National Health Service in the UK, where the doctor prescribes you to go to rather than a pill, prescribes, you know, attendance at a community music group. Okay, so that's but those are two examples. They're kind of handmade examples where somebody has built up this collection of records for TLC map by hand, sort of manually. If we click on, I'll show you another example. This is, as it were, made by machine. This is a PhD student at ANU, Fianwala Morgan, who collected, or got the machine to find, mentions of bushfires in 19th century Australian newspapers, and again got the machine to find locations that were mentioned nearby, and then geolocate those locations, as it were, and put them on a map. So she's got this massive resource. There's about 7,000 data points you're looking at there of mentions of bushfires in 19th century Australian newspapers. And it gets a bit crowded towards the southeast corner, so you'd probably want to zoom in or do something statistical to analyze that kind of information. But that's at the other end of the scale. Instead of painfully doing it by hand, she's done it, well, probably painfully equally, but done it by machine. And on her project, quite interestingly, is to compare what the mentions of bushfires in the newspapers in in Australia in the 19th century with mentions of bushfires in fiction. So do they overlap and so on? So she's making another collection of mention of bushfires in novels and stories. Okay, so it's a time-layered cultural map. So just my last data set that I'll mention is, if we go on to the next one, we'll show you the time dimension. This time it's something done by John Maynard and Victoria Haskins, a digital map of the Aborigines Protection Welfare Board missions, reserves and stations. This is sort of extract from that. And this is just zooming in on this part of the map and on 1932, for the sake of, so you can see a time slider down the bottom there. You can move that along and you'll see just those missions, reserves and stations that were open in that year. In this case, and also in this case, it's combined with the railway lines that were constructed and operational in 1932. Again, you can see the potential there to see, is there any connection? Do they tend to be on railway lands or not? And so on. So that's another one of these data layers. Okay, so I hope you get the idea from that of the kind of things you can do with the map, which you should be able to do really quickly, like, this afternoon, as it were, to get it through data points and put it on the map. That's the idea, lower the barrier to entry for people, especially humanities researchers who want to use maps. Okay, now I'll move on a little bit to, if we go to the next slide, I'll just show you what we're doing, or mention what we're doing this year and next in developing TLC map. We have a Gazetteer of Historical Australian Places, which is kind of backbone of the map, which we got from various sources. And that's going to be upgraded and integrated with the Australian Research Data Commons, Hassan Indigenous Research Data Commons, sorry, slightly convoluted. So that we're very pleased with that. It means that that element of TLC map is going to be part of national infrastructure, as it were. It's, it should be a standard way of finding and geolocating Australian places. Another thing we're going to do, which we're actually embarked on now, is to create an option for users to pick layers from a list and combine them. So you could combine several map layers and put them together. I think that'll be really exciting. You'll be able to put in your data and then see some, or if it'd be great if I could combine it. Let's say you're looking at, well, one perspective, you look at the frontier wars around Bathurst. We've got a collection of items about that. Let's compare that with the massacre data, which we hope to get on the map later this year. So you'll be able to combine things. We're going to have a digital mapping workshop, another activity this year, in 17th to 18th November. Still working on that, but we hope to get a whole lot of workshops in digital mapping, got some committed already, and then hope to get a nice gathering of people and also do it online in 17th, 18th November, kind of festival of digital mapping for the humanities. And another project, this is more for next year, is to use TLC map to add a kind of spatiotemporal window to a big language archive called Paradisec, which is Aboriginal languages and Pacific languages, a huge collection of data. I think they've got 100+ terabytes of data, audio, video, text, etc., led by Bill Palmer. So that's a big project. Okay, that's pretty much all I've got for you. If we go on to the next slide.
Try this.
I just mention, can't help but mention that last year we won a good design award for the map, and here's ARDC kind of celebrating the because when they were one of our funders, and this means that Bill Pascoe, who was the system architect for TLC map, has this gold design award in his trophy cabinet to go with his Walkley Award for coverage of Indigenous affairs for the massacre map. And we mentioned Lyndall at the beginning of this, at the top of the show, as it were, and so this is another reference to the wonderful colonial frontier massacre map. Yeah, so that's basically it. If we go to the last one, oh no, penultimate one, I'll just show you the, that's the URL for the TLC map, even though, or it might be a lot easier just to do TLC map into Google and find it. That's my email. Very interested in any thoughts you might have about TLC map. You can also, there's also a TLC map email and a particular email for the TLC map workshop. So if you happen to be interested in coming, do send an email there, or you've got an idea for what kind of digital mapping workshop should be offered, or indeed want to offer a workshop, please do use that email. And then just my last slide, which is say thank you. And it's sort of cross-species kind of use of TLC map. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Hugh. That's fabulous. I mean, it's come a long way now. You seem to have a lot more people putting their data in.
Yes. Yep.
And you're making it a lot more easier for people to put that data in too, which is fantastic.
I believe it is pretty easy. I do it myself all the time, and it is pretty easy. And we have got data. We always want more.
No, that's great.
You know, it's what we exist. We exist, you know, to be useful.
Yeah, I guess those workshops are going to be very handy, especially in guiding people on how to prepare their data.
Yes.
For it, because I mean, I know that we're about to have some meetings with pharmacists, retired pharmacists, and people in the pharmacy school about tackling some of their pharmacy data. You know, so what people were being prescribed at particular times.
Yes.
As some kind of medical layer that can go over the top, so we can start correlating what's going on in the landscape, along with the environmental data, industrial, you know. Mapping is just fantastic. I'm so glad you're doing this. It was just wonderful to see. Any questions for Hugh and the team? So you deserve all those awards, by the way. So you know.
Yeah, well, only one so far, but yeah, that's right.
Well, what about the other one, the Walkley one?
Oh, yeah, but that's not really TLC map. That was the Frontier Massacre.
But isn't it connected? It is
connected, yeah. But
well,
we can't claim all the credit.
You know, yes, you can. Okay. Any questions? Raise a hand or shout or just barge in, because I can't see everybody. There's too many of you. Everyone's quiet? Ah, there you go. Ian.
Hugh, if I could just for a couple of maybe obvious questions, is there, if I dive into this site, and it looks really impressive, it looks like I probably spend many, many hours browsing through. Is there a master menu? If I dive into it, is there a master menu that goes to different categories?
Well, no, they're not organized in categories at the moment. There's a little, you can click on something saying browse layers, and then you'll see them displayed. There's not a huge amount. There's like two. So you go to, if you go to tools, then Gazetteer, and then browse layers. Oh yeah, great. There's browse layers. Yeah, if you click on browse layers. Oh no, okay. Start again. All right. Tool. All right. Click on browse layers up on the ribbon at the top.
Yeah.
That's it. Click on that, and then you'll get them listed. And then there's another page of them, I think. I know, or maybe no, maybe, yeah. If maybe to the right, does it say? Anyway, that's where they're. That is page 2 by the look of it. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so so and that's where you can find them and have a look there. There's all sorts of different ways of visualizing them. Now, what is that one? That is don't recognize that one.
It's a
Oh yeah,
rec.
it's the recs. Okay, yeah.
So Hugh, has this been open to academics across the board, or are they mostly, where are those where are these time layered maps coming from?
It's mostly people like that Finn Morgan one that I mentioned. She was a like an intern in the map.
Yep.
I mean, it's mostly people with whom we've had a connection, as it were. We haven't got too many people just from outside, but it's perfectly possible to do it
Now,
randomly, as it were.
Yeah, and the other thing I was going to ask, is there any plans to connect this with the CSIRO's Data 61 national map? Because they're working with modern. I mean, they're missing the historical bit. So all their data sets are modern, and they really need the history side. So is there a plan down the track when this thing starts to really gather momentum in terms of the amount of uptake?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious thing, we haven't really talked to them. The obvious thing would be if we can download a data set from them, which has geolocation, we can upload it into TLC map.
Yeah.
And then use it as a layer, as a background, and so on.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. Like that, there is, of course, a massive.
I mean, they need
mapping.
you, if you know what I mean.
No,
they don't have the history bit, and
no, that is
stuff,
our opportunity, or our
it's the opportunity to really dovetail.
kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't know. The connection is our VC because he used to work with them.
Okay,
so he used to run the Data 61. So chase it up with Alex and just see, because I mean,
that's a great idea.
When I've had a look at it, I've just said, look, this is what they're missing, and I've spoken to some of the IT crowd here about it, because I said, look, we've got an enormous untapped resource. I mean, Howard and the work that they've been doing with their weather records is the case in point. And it's just, it's going to be exciting when all these various,
if they can converge.
That's right, and find out things. But anyway, any other questions, comments? Very exciting stuff here, though. No? Last chance, going once, going twice. Done. You're off the hook. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Thanks for inviting me. See you later. Bye-bye.
Okay, over to guest number 2, Dr. Rosalind Kerr. Ros is very heavily involved with the early incarnations of the Hunter Living Histories in its Coal River Working Party days, and did a lot of work with us, especially in identifying the gunpowder tunnels within Nobbies at one stage. So she's here to return to talk with us about further aspects on the Aboriginal use of Nobbies tuff for making stone tools, which I think you'll find very interesting. Over to you, Ros, and welcome back. You're on mute again. Can't hear you.
Is that right now?
Yes.
I seem to have to keep my finger on.
Yeah, you might have to.
Okay.
Yeah, keep your finger on it. Yeah.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, then. Thanks, Anne, for inviting me to give a short talk. What's happened? Okay, I'll just give an introduction first before we have some pictures. I sent Anne a few pictures. This short talk follows on for an interview I gave with Karen Crofts of Lighthouse Arts last year. I discussed the nature of the Nobbies tuff, which makes up most of Nobbies Head, its volcanic origins and as volcanic ash, and the variety of tuff layers in the sequence. Only one kind of tuff has been used by Aborigines to make stone tools. They're what I call silicified tuff bands within the Nobbies tuff, and they're suitable for making stone tools. Now, the silicified tuff layers are kind of volcanic ash, but it has been enriched in silica after deposition during burial and later by weathering. So the only particular layers, these really hard, fine-grained layers that are suitable for making Aboriginal stone tools. The other components of the Nobbies tuff, other layers are either crumbly or they don't break into nice sharp pieces. Now, if we have the first slide, please, Anne. The one was number 1. I numbered them in order. The one that's called number 1 at the top of the screen. That's the one. Good. So we're going to have a look beyond Nobby's Head, which was the subject of the first interview. We're going to follow the Nobby's Tooth along the coast, and then we're going to follow it inland where you can find outcrops of this rock. So if we look on the coast from Nobby's Head in the northeast, the right-hand side of that sketch, to the southwest end, which is Little Red Head Point at the northern end of Dudley Beach. Now, I've marked in the little ticks in the Nobby's Tooth, which is the layer, it's one big layer making up most of Nobby's headland. And you could follow it along to Shepherd's Hill and then follow it down to Merryweather Cliffs, then further down to Burwood Beach, Glenrock Lagoon, and then all the way to Little Red Head Point. Now, this geological unit was once just a whole sort of blanket, one big layer that covered a very extensive area. But you notice in that cross-section that there's a lot of bits missing. The layers only occur in the hills or the headlands, and there's lots of gaps in between where there's no Nobby's Tooth anymore. And that's because it's been removed by erosion over tens of millions of years, weathering by wind and rain, salt air, as well as erosion by ancient rivers and the sea. And so a lot of the actual layer is missing. So we can only join the dots as you can see there in the layers as they appear in the cliffs. And you can see from that diagram that the layer of the Nobby's Tooth along the coast makes an arch shape and a broad, very broad arch type structure. And that's been called the Shepherd's Hill Anticline. Now, there's a fair bit of faulting, so not so many layers, not so much of it is actually curved. There's a lot of sort of broken by faulting, but it gives the idea of an arch. So if we follow along from, can you hear me okay? Yeah, follow along from Nobby's Headland. You can see it's high in the cliffs at Merryweather, and then, Shepherd's Hill, Merryweather, down to sea level. We have a look in a bit more detail. Travelling from Nobby's Headland, the cliffs of Shepherd's Hill, just below the fort, you can see an outcrop there. It can be seen from the picnic shelter in the Hairpin Bend in King Edward Park. And on the other side of the hill, on the southern side, a road cutting on Memorial Drive opposite Fenton Avenue. We have a photograph of that one. Please, Anne. Yep, the top photo. Yep, that's it. Top photo is the one we want to look at. And in that photograph, you can see, first of all, at the top, yeah, that's better. This is from a Bather's Way report on the geology I did for Newcastle City Council, as the cross-section is from that report as well, back in 2000. So in that road cutting, which is opposite Fenton Avenue in Memorial Drive, most of that, what you can see there's been rehabilitated by Landcare, so you can't see much of the rocks anymore. But over 20 years ago, you could see the geological sequence really well. And the very top layer is the Merryweather Conglomerate. That's the ones with all the big cracks in the top. And that rock originally capped Nobby's Headland before the top was removed to construct a lighthouse. Now, the Nobby's Tooth there, you can see it just above the vegetation, and it looks quite crumbly there. It's there's some quite hard layers jutting out. You can see it's a fairly pale coloured rock with some iron staining, and just above it is some shale which contains some very nice plant fossils, and that's the Victoria Tunnel Seam horizon. So we can see the Nobby's Tooth in that road cutting. You can also see the conglomerate on the top, on the side of the obelisk, and also along Memorial Drive underneath the Anzac Bridge.
Don't worry, Frankie. Anybody could have made that mistake. You're going to get the hang of it. Well, guys, that's it. You don't need me anymore.
Okay, so we can go on to the next slide. No, not that one. We'll go to the next one, please, Anne.
I don't like the lies. Well, how about so long? Ain't much better. Look, you take care of yourself.
Someone's talking. I can hear someone else talking.
I might just
Okay.
have to remind people to put themselves on mute, if that's okay.
You know, the righteous dude. And I'm standing back. Thank you, man.
There's all sorts of squeals going on. I don't know what's happening. Anyway, this is a cliff section on the ocean side of Shepherd's Hill. The Nobby's Tuff is that layer at the top. It's made up of compacted layers of volcanic ash. You can see it's sort of a creamy, it's a light grey colour with some rusty faces. And it sits on top of the Nobby's coal seam, which was a peat swamp originally. And that was annihilated by the volcanic eruptions that deposited the Nobby's Tuff. And then there's other layers below that. So that's just to show the Nobby's Tuff in context of some of the geology, the rock layers beneath the Nobby's Tuff. And they've been uplifted. So you can see the Nobby's Tuff is at the top of the hill, whereas back at the headland, Nobby's headland, it's goes down to sea level. And the Merryweather Conglomerate has been removed by erosion on this section of Shepherd's Hill. Okay, so we'll go back to the cross section, please, Anne. Yeah, the number one. Yep. You can see now that at Shepherd's Hill, the Nobby's Tuff was near the top of the cliff or right on top of the cliff in some places. And if we go along to Merryweather Cliffs, that layer has now moved down to a bit under halfway along the cliff, and then to Glenrock Lagoon on either side. The layer is just above sea level. And so we're going to have a look at where the rock came from that was made into Aboriginal artefacts. So Professor Dial back in 1971, who was Professor of Organic Chemistry at Newcastle Uni, but he had a really deep interest in exploring the coast for Aboriginal artefacts before the sand miners got in and removed them from the beaches. And he wrote a report about the Newcastle coast, the deposits that he had found. And he said that the local Aborigines collected lumps of Nobby's Tuff, suitable lumps that had fallen from the cliffs of Nobby's and Merryweather Cliffs, and also around Glenrock Lagoon. They collected pieces that had already fallen down into nice handy lumps and carried them back to their campsites and chipped away and made stone artefacts. And he found in those days some really big lumps on Glenrock Beach with heaps and heaps of waste flakes around them. So he designated them as quarry sites. So today we think of quarries as just holes in the ground or they're dug out, but Aborigines just had to pick up some lumps already nicely broken up, ready to transport to a nice comfortable spot and chip away and produce their artefacts. So the quarry sites that are mentioned in the records around Newcastle are actually just lumps that have been chipped away at a particular campsite or what's referred to as a quarry site. Some of the artefacts that have been found later also have rounded or curved surfaces, pebble faces. So cobbles or pebbles of Nobby's Tuff were also used to make artefacts. And I think there's some of those in the Palais collection. They have some rounded like pebble faces. So some water-worn pebbles were also collected and made into stone artefacts. Only silicified tuff was used for that. Back to the more story. Okay, so if we're off the coast, we've been along the coast, and by the time you get to the northern headland of Dudley, the Nobby's Tuff is right at low tide level only on the northern headland of Dudley, called Little Redhead Point. If you go further south, it's disappeared below sea level, so it's dipping down towards Sydney and buried by then. So you can only see this rock type between Nobby's Head and Little Redhead Point along the coast. Now, if you move inland, there's another map that you can show, Anne, please, the last map. Yep. At the top is, I scanned this map a long time ago from Peter Warbrook's PhD thesis on the lower part of the Newcastle coal measures. And the very top bit, I'm not sure whether it actually exists or whether it was sort of bound in the thesis and I couldn't copy it. I have to come back and have another look. Anyway, this map shows the thickness of the Nobby's Tuff as you follow it inland. It's called an isopack map. That means a thickness map of that particular layer, which a volcanic ash layer that smothered the landscape and formed like a blanket over the peat swamp of the time. Now you can follow the outcrop from Merryweather Cliffs, Burwood and Glenrock beaches inland to the west and west-northwest. So that's that line at the top, very top of the map. That shows the dotted line at the top of that map, which wiggles around, and it goes from the coast of Merryweather Cliffs. Follow it inland from the coast to Wallsend, Minmi, Seahampton, Stockington and Black Hill. Now these inland exposures dip to the south, gently to the south underneath Lake Macquarie. In the Black Hill area, there's an outcrop around 4 metres thick, and in that area there have been quite a few archaeological surveys carried out for various developments, and a lot of the artefacts are made of silicified tuff, so they probably came from the Nobby's Tuff in the Black Hill area. If you look at that contour map, you can see that the thickest sections of the Nobby's Tuff, the thickest section is at Nobby's Head itself, and thick sections at Merryweather and Shepherd's Hill, Merryweather and Glenrock. Overall, by looking at outcrops and drill holes and measurements in underground coal mines, the Nobby's Tuff thins to the southwest. You can see on that map there's a contour, I think it says a 2 metre contour. So even though there are very thick intersections along the coast, it thins drastically to the southwest, and all of this area below that line is actually underground. So it's not really relevant for Aboriginal artefacts, but it's just interesting in knowing where the volcanic ash came from, because it shows that the unit thins to the southwest and the thickest part is to the north, indicating the source of the volcano, the volcanic source was to the northeast. And also the wide area that is very thin is likely to be just airfall tuff. It's just fallen down from an ash cloud onto the Nobby's peat swamp and settled there. There's sort of 3 thin layers can be identified within that 2 metre or 1.5 metre section, which most of the Nobby's Tuff is only that thick. And the unusually thick layers on the coast and up near Black Hill and near the outcrops around Minmi, the thicker layers, the volcanic ash has been transported by water, by rivers, and sort of piled up and become thicker. So the unusual thick sequences are water laid by a river, being redistributed by river after the ash fell nearby and was washed into rivers and accumulated there. But most of the Nobby's Tuff is much thinner and accumulated just as thin, at 3 thin ash layers straight out of the sky, undisturbed into a peat swamp. So this Nobby's Tuff for geologists is very important. It's a good marker bed. It can be easily identified in drill core and coal mines and can be traced 150 kilometres by its geochemical signature all the way up to Denman, Broke and Musselbrook in the Upper Hunter. It's about 150 kilometres away, and possibly it can be identified on the south coast as well. So it's a very widespread marker bed, and it's important for helping to correlate the coal measures in the area. So it's thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ros. Are there any, so Ros, in terms of trying to track the use of Nobby's Tuff, is it important to know that it's localized to a particular area, or is this a layer that's connected across a larger area than what you've just said?
Well, I think it's in archaeological surveys, they always want to know where the rock came from, the raw material came from. And usually if there are a lot of rocks of the same, a lot of artifacts made of the same kind of rock, and they call it a silicified tuff, it's likely to be, source rock is likely to be fairly close. And there are other tuff layers in the coal measures, but the Nobby's tuff seems to have as far as outcrop goes, the thickest exposures. Well, not necessarily the thickest, but more widespread and easily seen.
Yeah, the question just came up with some Aboriginal researchers that wanted to understand trading of,
that's
of
right.
tools. If it turns up somewhere where we say that this thing was definitely traded and not just created from the local source, if you know what I mean.
That's right. It says so where there's a local outcrop of Nobby's tuff, and it would contain, being close to the surface, would contain some of these silicified or cherty layers. Chert is another name that's been used.
Okay.
Merryweather chert's been used, but it's all the same geological unit. If it's close by, the outcrops are close by, it's most likely that that's where the rocks is for the artifacts that have been found. They didn't have to trade them too far if there's local outcrops. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, that's right. Yes. Oh,
Yeah.
well, look, it's been sort of, I don't know how much work's been done in the area, but it's always good to know where this stuff can be found. I mean, that we can sort of say that this material's originated in a particular area and it's been traded, So
Sure.
Denman's to me seems pretty far away, but it depends on how accessible the raw material was in making the tool. So
the point of what I was trying to say, was that by knowing where the rock outcrops, you've got some idea of knowing where, or you have an idea of where the raw materials are located. So when you find some an archaeological survey is carried out and they're finding.
So that's not very accessible, the stuff that's been found out further.
Well, that's right. But a lot of reports are only buried in national parks and wildlife, archaeological records. Some you can find online, but others you'd have to have permission from national parks to actually have access to the reports.
Now Ross, we had a question from Stephen Hurst. Is that right? How long ago was the explosion and did it have a key role in the formation of the coal seam?
The Nobby's tuff has been dated as 255 million years old. That's in the Permian period, late Permian period. And the volcanic ash annihilated the Nobby's coal seam. But the volcanic eruptions only lasted for a very short space of time. And after the explosions and the volcanic ash settled on the ground, things got back to normal with river systems and peat swamps. So this has happened many times because there are many tuff layers or several large thick tuff layers within the Newcastle coal measures, and they're only short-lived eruptions that have created the volcanic ash. And as soon as the volcano has a rest, the vegetation grows back over the tuff.
Well, I guess it gets fertilised like it does in Pompeii.
And river systems just wash in more silt. And
now Dave Cameron has a question as well. David?
Yeah, thanks, John. Hi, Ros.
Hi.
Yes, I've come across this silicified tuff in archaeological surveys, sort of around the Hunter Valley between Singleton and Musselbrook. And you may or may not be aware, there's been a bit of debate within archaeological circles about terminology. Often, tuff has been referred to, but there's also more commonly in archaeological circles in the Hunter Valley referred to as indurated mudstone. But it would, as you're probably aware.
That's something I was going to mention, that some archaeological reports refer to indurated mudstone, and then someone else has sort of said, well, that's really silicified tuff. And another word was chert. Well, the early geologists referred to Nobby's tuff as Nobby's chert because they're the layers that were stood out the most because they're resistant to weathering, but they're only part of the sequence. There's all these other layers, sandy layers and shaly layers as well. They're all made of volcanic ash, but they have a different texture and different properties.
Mm.
So, yeah, silicified tuff's a bit of a mystery to a lot of archaeologists, I think, and
Yeah, that's
a lot of trouble with terminology and trying to correlate what is the rock type they're actually looking at.
That's right, and they're trying to find a common terminology. There's a great little 2-page short paper by Hughes and Watchman in 2011 in Australian Archaeology. So I'd be happy to share that if you're interested in it. But that sort of summarises this debate, and they haven't really landed on an answer.
Yep, that sounds good. I think because archaeologists don't have a geological training, and they have like reference rocks, apparently at the Australian Museum, reference rocks to help them, but it really doesn't cover. It's really hard because it doesn't cover all the variations, and it takes a while to get your eye in to recognise what the rock actually is. And also, a lot of artefacts have been buried if they've come from a salvage operation. They've been buried in the soil. A lot of the artefacts are quite dirty and yucky, and it's really hard as a geologist to sort of see what is the rock type underneath the dirt or the soil, or the bit of deterioration after being buried. And obviously, being an artifact, you can't do a thin section. You can't cut it open and have a close look.
But to John's point about the distribution, I'll just quickly finish on that. Is it is actually quite common through that part of the Hunter Valley, which has come out of the Hunter River and the cobbles and so forth.
You're talking about this particular rock?
Yeah, well, what they're terming as tuff or indurated mudstone of that very grey, fine material, silicious material.
So if any of this ever ends up in Queensland, that we'll know it's been traded here at some point. Is that right?
Well, there's several thick layers in the Newcastle coal measures, but the coal measures extend all the way up, as you know, to Denman, Singleton, Muswellbrook, and there's tuff layers in those coal measures as well. Some of them actually, one does correlate with the Nobby's tuff, but they would look pretty similar. So you can't definitely say, unless you did some sort of chemical test, which tuff layer in the coal measures you're actually looking at. But you can say it comes from the Hunter Valley. And the best thing is to actually look around where the archaeological survey is being done, have a look around at the landscape and walk up and down creeks and try and find some source rocks if you've got a lot of that kind of rock. So if you can find an outcrop.
And we'd be interested in that terminology discussion too, because we've got early reports that were written by Daniel F. Cooksey in the 1920s. And they were sort of amateur people that were very interesting, working out of the early BHP site and identifying foundry sites or factory sites along the old bend of the south arm of the Hunter River, and also going into, and they mentioned the Chert a lot. So it'd be interesting to see what they were actually talking about. Anyway, any other questions for Ros?
Yes, Tony.
Yep. Peter Sherlock.
Yeah, hi, Ros.
Hi, Peter, how are you going?
Very well, thank you. Would you like to take a stab at the location of the volcanic source?
Yeah, well, there's some debate amongst geologists, and people don't always look at all the evidence. They find one bit of evidence and say, oh, yeah, that sounds good. They say, oh, it comes from the north, and then there's another train or another other research that indicates it could have come from the east, or that's particularly relevant to, say, Swansea Heads, which is another tuff layer where the trees have been flattened so you can see where the blast came from. It came from the east. But the thickness of the tuff, I think, is really important. That shows it comes from the northeast. So some people say that the volcanoes were to the north, others to the east, but the overall evidence appears to me to be sort of the northeast, so it's in between. But the northeast source also correlates with where most of the rivers came from, all the rivers that flowed down from the mountains, which were quite close in this area at the time. And there's definitely land off to the east. The coastline wasn't where it is today. It was a lot further east than it is today. There was land extending east of the present coastline and ranges of mountains and volcanoes out there as well. And so it's the rivers, from looking at which way the rivers flowed from the sedimentary structures in the sandstone channels and the arrangement of the channels, the shapes of them through the coal measures, all indicate a northeasterly source. So it seems like the rivers and the volcanoes were northeast is the most likely place.
Currently,
It doesn't mean that some didn't come from the north and from the east as well, but the overall trend is from the northeast for both the river sediments and the volcanic ash.
but there's no recognised subsea volcanic cone or anything that we know about.
Well, the easterly source is a structure that's been determined by remote sensing offshore during exploration of the continental shelf, remote sensing, and that's where there's a possible easterly source. It's called the offshore high, but it's really was onshore in those days. A geological structure which was a possible source of volcanoes that when they to the east of the present New South Wales coast. So that structure has been identified in the rocks underneath the continental shelf soft sediment cover. And we know there are lots of volcanoes to the north in the New England area because you can see lots of volcanic rocks and intrusive rocks of the same age. So it could be east, north, or northeast.
Thanks, Ros.
You can't prove it. You can only look at the evidence and suggest which is the best interpretation based on the evidence that you have.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. If there are no more questions, thank you very much, Ros.
Yeah, thanks, Johnny. And also the fellow, I didn't get his name, who said he's got some archaeological discussion about the rock types. Yeah, if you could.
Was that David?
Who was that?
So David's just shared it in the chat, and I've also downloaded it, so I can send it on, Ros, if you can't download it here.
Okay, that'd be great. Yeah, be interested in that. Yep. Yeah, it's a challenge for archaeologists to recognise rock types because there's so much variation and so many little facets you have to look at. So yes, it's a pretty hard job sometimes. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Ros. All right, so before our next guests, we'll go to the news, and in between these stories, I'll probably refer to some people here for updates as well. So firstly, some stats. The Hunter Living History site for June has had 10,367 views. The Living Histories data platform has had 721,000 for June. The YouTube channel has had 8.6 thousand views with over 484 hours watched, mostly of the NBN footage that Anne's been putting up online. So there's been over, in the lifetime, 457,000 views with 27.6 thousand hours watched. So there's a lot of Hunter regional history getting out there. And our Flickr site is sitting at 68 million views. So we started June with taking a stand against the famous Newcastle statue, as reported in the Newcastle Herald. That features a story with Associate Professor Nancy Cushing, cyber radical Nicholas Orr, and lockup artistic director Courtney Novak to create a digital art project with the James Fletcher statue in Fletcher Park. That's just adjacent to Watt Street in Newcastle, for people not familiar. The research project will enable the various sides of people's views to monuments and historical characters like Fletcher to be explored and reimagined using digital art in partnership with the Lockup Art Space. So as part of a project, the drone was used to take a series of photographs from different angles to make a virtual replica of the statue. And the digital tools will enable artists to change the shape and color of the statue and critique it. So I guess this is a kind of should we just do what other people in other countries have done and just sort of drag it and throw it into the ocean, or we do something new with it? And this is what these people are attempting to do. So I think there's a forthcoming exhibition that will feature all this, or if it hasn't already occurred, but that's basically the story. On the 4th of the 6th, we had Sea of Memories Phil's Maritime Exhibition. Scott Bevan wrote a piece on the Maritime Union of Australia exhibition at the Hunter Unions building. The exhibition celebrated 150 years of the first waterside workers union that was formed in Australia. The story is told through hundreds of artefacts, paper, paper records and photographs collected by the Union's archives, as well as those of its members, including the late John Forbes, who had spent over 40 years working on merchant ships around Australia's coastline and across the seas, including a voyage to Vietnam in 1966. His wife was one of the organisers. Linda Forbes said, "This to me is Newcastle. It's their Novocastrian story. Because somehow or other they have had a connection to this, whether through industries, shipbuilding and mining." So it really emphasises the maritime history that has helped shape the town and the country that we live in. On the 4th of the 6th, the Newcastle Herald letters to the editor, "Monumental change, what will mark the Hunter Powers heritage." That was Dr. Ken Thornton, who addressed us as well in a piece, also wrote a letter to the editor regarding the power stations. And wondering what will happen with regards to the future as coal-fired power is sort of phased down in the future. How will we remember these things? So on the 6th of the 6th, curious clues to the mystery mine entrance at Nobby's, Mike Scanlon featured a diorama that was created around 1988 that seemed to show the entrances to the mines under Fort Scratchley at Flagstaff Hill around 1804. These dioramas, he thinks, might have been part of the Freeman's Waterhole displays, but he actually had it there just to get people thinking about the original site of the convict coal mines. From our studies back in 2005, it was pretty difficult to ascertain. We knew where the entrances were, but the actual area had been sort of the original mines may have been shaved off to actually create the pier. History talk in the Maitland Mercury featured Dr. Leslie Kilmartin speaking about his ancestor, Captain William Cromarty, well known in the Newcastle and Port Stephens area in the early colonial days of the 1820s. The talk, William Cromarty, a Rare Bird, was given at the Maitland Historical Society's rooms at Maitland. He also published a novel, The Cromartys of Port Stephens, and a biography, The Elusive Captain Cromarty. So he also did a session with us back in August 2021. I'm not sure if we recorded it, but anyway, he delivered a presentation here to the Hunter Living Histories. If you're interested in it, check out Mike Scanlon's feature on uncovering the story of the elusive pioneer of Port Stephens in the Newcastle Herald of the 18th of the 6th, page 8. On the 9th of the 6th, 2022, was the blast from the past as Fort Scratchley fires up memories of the attack on Newcastle, and they were remembering, and it was a commemoration of what occurred 80 years ago. Ron, do you have anything to add to that story?
Yes, we had a firing at 2:17 on the guns at 2:17 p.m. not AM. We thought that the neighbours mightn't have liked it at AM. We also had with us that day the New South Wales Japanese consulate attaché for, let me think what it was again, for information and culture, and she was also the political liaison. She'd been in Australia 1 week. Her previous post had been in New York. So she was there on that day, and while she didn't fire, she was most impressed, and we've had a great deal of contact with the consulate and with the embassy and so on. And there's a distinct possibility that when the Japanese university opens, that the ambassador will be one of the people here, and he's been invited to come to the fort, and as we'll look to probably fire one of the guns. At present, only one of them is actually operating. The little attaché, she apparently wasn't allowed to fire the guns. although when we had the Asian Cup here, quite a number of the Japanese soccer team actually fired the guns on their visit. So interesting culturally that particular visit. And then we had the open day where we had on the long weekend Monday with something well over 1,000 people going through on the day.
Right.
That's about it. Thanks, Johnny.
Great. Thank you, Ron. On the 10th of the 6th, the Australian Online published 10 things to do in Newcastle, promoting a number of historical and cultural attractions such as the Bogey Hole, Fort Scratchley, Nobbies, the coastal walks, including the Anzac Memorial Walk, the Newcastle Art Gallery, and they also included the Morpeth Museum, which I thought was a bit strange, as well as the Colin, Cedar and Kingsley bars. So they probably left out the Newcastle Museum, but it's a bit of, I wonder if they realise that Morpeth is a bit of a hike down the road. But anyway, it was interesting to see the historic focus of things to do when you're in Newcastle. On the 11th of the 6th, Newcastle Herald reported on Lakes United celebrates 75 years of Newcastle Rugby League. And the quote here was, the secret to lasting 75 years, an anniversary being celebrated this weekend, might be the willingness of those involved to give back. So the club won a premiership in its inaugural 1947 season, as has claimed a further 10 in the years since. So players in the past have always put their hand up to contribute to the future. Former player and club historian Steve Brown said, players have turned coaches, administrators, sponsors and volunteers. On the 13th and 6th, St Patrick's Primary Swansea celebrated its 70th anniversary with a blast from the past. There was lots of blasts going on this month. The sisters opened the school on what is now the McDonald's site on January 29th, 1952, and the school was relocated on trucks in 1977 and 1978 to its present site. They celebrated with a liturgy, a barbecue and a concert where the students turned the historic stories of each decade into song or mashed up a set of songs to remember that decade. So another interesting use of remembering history. On the 13th of the 6th, the Newcastle Herald reported on maritime past adrift, proposed by the veteran seafarers to repurpose it was a proposal by the veteran seafarers to repurpose the Wickham School of Arts into a Newcastle Maritime Museum. The Veterans Association of the Maritime Union of Australia are apparently angry that the Newcastle Maritime Museum were turfed out of their home in Honeysuckle. And the president stating that for Newcastle to have no maritime museum was embarrassing and shameful. So that's interesting because there are people on we've been working with that have a great interest in the Wickham School of Arts, but that proposal just, I don't know if Peter, you've got anything more to add from the maritime point of view?
Johnny, the best answer to that is no, nothing, except that we're well aware of the building, but we don't think it's particularly suited to the scale of the exhibits that we have.
Yes, okay, that's right. Okay, 16th of the 6th, letters to the editor, Raymond Stewart of Charlestown. From Big Things Grow, very interesting story about the proposed use of the historic Wickham School of Arts, and then added a bit of extra information in addition to the fact that young Henry Lawson used the library there. But he said in the early 1960s, the venue was being used as a Sunday afternoon dance stomp by a young Newcastle-based band called the Vibratones, with the lead vocalist Ricky Wayne, Max Rothenfeld, and well-known Johnny Noble. Fast forward 6 months and the band were then in Sydney with the new vocalist Billy Thorpe and a new name, the Aztecs, with the #1 hit record Poison Ivy, which pushed the Beatles out of the #1 position at that time. The rest is history. So that's another connection for the Wickham School of Arts that's connected now to the Aztecs. It's always good to know. Cessnock City Library conducted a history walk on the 17th of the 6th that took in the Catholic convent with 2 almost forgotten coal mines and the hidden history of Bridges Hill. The Maitland Heritage Fest ran over the 18th and 19th of June for its second year in the Church Street precinct that was spread across St Mary's Church Ground, St Mary's Hall, CW8 Hall, and Brough and Grossman houses. On the 18th of the 6th, the Maitland Park Bowling Club, they announced that they were set to close, so that in July, after 120 years of operation. So it's one of the oldest bowling clubs in New South Wales that had been occupied, the current clubhouse, since the 1950s. That's sad to see it go, but I guess I don't know how many people are still bowling. On the 18th of the 6th, war letter was returned to Belgian family, tells the story of an interesting letter that came into the possession of a family in, where was it? Hubbard Street, Islington. That it contained a diary. It was sent to a woman called Maisie Duffin, who lived at 42 Hubbard Street in Islington in 1943. The diary ran from 1941 to 1936, and it was kept by a woman called Fernande Hackray. So she wrote the letter at age 40, and when she was living at Braschat in Belgium and under enemy fire. So it's a real wonderful historical record. She wrote that she was being driven mad while still at home among the bombs, planes, and their marching machine guns and sirens. Her daughters, Janine and Francois, were white as sheets, shaking with fear, clinging to me. They could not eat anymore. One village near theirs had been destroyed, the letter said. Fernand had closed the letter with her wish that it be one day returned to her, but it never was. The letter came into the hands of another resident of the same street, Carol Hugginson, who, through all this research, managed to track down the daughter of Fernando, Janine, just before her 93rd birthday, and reconnected her with her mother's letter after all those years. So it's interesting that she sent this almost to maybe a friend here for safekeeping while they were being bombarded, and all these years later they were able to return the letter. So wonderful story. On the 21st of the 6th, Sean Tamplin responded to Ken Thornton's letter to the editor regarding the energy transition, and just wanted to mark that Raring also has other history that needs preserving and celebrating as a viable farming area. So alternatively, he suggested that the Raring power station, if it's due to close in 2023-25, some of the land in the buffer zone could be used for a museum commemorating Raring's history, including that of the power station. Now, this is an interesting one with regards to the debate with the Maritime Museum. On the 23rd, plans for the last of the pump house restorations, so restoration of the Carrington engine house, is almost complete, with a public exhibition of the final stage of the project. So there's a $1.5 million refurb going. I can't wait until that's completed, because I think it's just such a beautiful building on the other side of the harbour there. Works on the historic pump house have included the construction of a new ramp, subfloor works, new concrete slab, removal of asbestos material, and interpretive landscaping. The landscaping will include 4 bronze plaques mounted to reclaim pieces of original sandstone, which will identify the historic crane bases and their year of construction. So they're currently looking again at a proposal for repurposing that building. So I thought, Peter, that might be a nice place for a maritime museum. I can imagine the William IV birthed somewhere in between our museum and the Carrington Pump House, and then you can sail people across and back again with a nice buffet lunch. It's a variation on it. It's variation on the on my idea many years ago to Jodie McKay to have gondolas out into the harbour to witness some kind of symphonic performance out the front of the Carrington Pump House. So you never know. Anything's possible.
Sounds good to me, John.
Then on the 25th of the 5th, Saving Historic Waratah Landmark is a true work of art. It was about the Waratah School of Arts building. It's now in possession of a private owner that's been restoring it. And it's been at that location since 1879. So she's really taken to it, and that she's hoping to reopen as an art gallery of sorts in that location. So Val Anderson, who's been really prominent in some of the Hunter regional historic groups, is working with her and has been doing a lot of historical research about the place of the Waratah School of Arts. We have a minute book. We have an original minute book from that very School of Arts, which we've also made available to them. Then on the 25th, we had the William IV Fortress Newcastle celebration cruise to celebrate the completion of the Fortress Newcastle project. Participants cruised the harbour with a catered 3-course lunch, and they were joined by Dr. Peter Hobbins, Head of Knowledge of the Australian Maritime Museum. Peter, would you like to provide an update, or Anne, or Bob Donnelly?
Peter or Bob Donnelly's here. But yeah, look, it was a beautiful day. It was really nice just to connect and keep that network sort of talking and supported, and great to have Peter Hogan's support from the National Maritime Centre. Yeah,
okay, that's wonderful. And yesterday we had a wonderful premiere of the Biriban and Threlkeld film at the Civic Theatre to mark the beginning of Naidoc Week. Glenn, I don't know whether you want to say a few words.
Well, just so that we did the first interview for this with you 2.5 years ago. So to stand on that stage last night with 500 people that had braved cyclonic weather to come out and watch it was probably one of the proudest moments of my life. And also we had last week we had the screening of it for the Wabakal descendants, and that meant almost as much. It was really important to actually get that seal of approval before we went into that screening, and the response since has been amazing. Everyone hung around for a couple of hours and drank, and it really just started a big conversation. And lots of conversations. The first person I met, this is one of those crazy moments. The first person I met as I walked out of the theatre into the bar was this woman who came up and said, "I'm actually a descendant of Threkold, and I grew up. My mother took me to see some of the original paperwork that the family had, and then said, but I just learnt more about him than I ever knew. Like, that was amazing. And I can't wait to show this film to the rest of the family." So and it just kept on going. I met educators that want to get into schools, and it just, yeah. So it's really started a big conversation. Also, there's a part in the film which you see, or you may have already seen, where there's a possum skin rug that was out at, taken by the US Explorer Expedition and put in the Smithsonian Institute 190 years ago, or whatever it was. And there's a lot of talk about people trying to bring that back to Newcastle. So that would be an incredible, knock on from the film. So if you want to see it and you haven't seen it already, it comes out on Friday on our YouTube channel. I'm sure John and Anne are going to share it furiously. Hopefully.
That's this Friday, Glenn.
This Friday coming up.
All right.
Actually, well,
Stay
to be
tuned.
honest, we're actually going to sneak it out on the Thursday night because
All right.
we're
So
doing,
why Thursday night? Why not now?
ABC Radio first thing on Friday morning.
Okay.
Doing it. I want it live, so when people hear it on the radio, they can watch it.
Okay.
But we need to get it on YouTube.
I knew there was a reason.
Well, no, we need to get it on YouTube. We also need to get it on our website. So it's all done, and we know it's working.
Yeah.
Because it hasn't. That ABC audience seems to be spot on our audience. So.
Okay.
So they'll a lot of people will watch it on Friday, and then there'll be a lot of stuff over Lost Newcastle and going into the weekend. But I couldn't be happier with that result. And it was just looking around, and I mean, you were on stage there, John. You saw what it was like. I couldn't believe it because it looked like there was not that many people. Downstairs, about 250 people, but upstairs there was another 250 people. So of the 580 people that booked, over 500 of those turned up in those terrible conditions yesterday. So that was, and if I had a choice, I probably wouldn't have gone myself, you know. So
anyway, that's great. Thank you, Glenn. And Emily just gave you a nice accolade in the chat if you want to have a look.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Emily. Okay, over to our next speaker, which is Associate Professor Howard Bridgeman, who will be talking on the Historical Weather Records Project. Over to you, Howard.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Oh. Everybody see that?
Yep. Yes. Yep.
Okay, hold on a second. I've got to get it going from the beginning. There we are. I'm having some problems here with my internet, so there. Okay. All right, this will be fairly brief. I think basically the people who are involved in this project are here in terms of the Zoom meeting. So if there's any questions that I can't answer, hopefully they will be able to. Basically, we realized fairly recently that this project has been going for more than 10 years. And that's a long time, actually. But then what's 10 years in history? I mean, there you have it, okay? So basically the idea is we got or obtained from certain different sources, a number of different sources, originally handwritten observations, $0.900 each day, which were weather observations that we then transcribed into spreadsheets to allow analysis. We acknowledge the superb data entry volunteers, and especially a man named Andrew Hogbin in New England at Armidale, who was the person who did the really, really nasty years toward the end of the Wollong project. But I'll get into that a little bit later. So basically, we have 5 locations in eastern New South Wales that have all now been digitized. Eversley near Armidale from 1877 to 1922. And we've had a few papers from that and several talks. Maryland, which is the New South Wales-Queensland border, 1868 to 1897. Wollong, which I'm going to focus on today, near Mount Vincent and Cessnock, 1893 to 1928 and 1929 to 1956. And I'll explain why there's a break between those 2 sets of data. And Glenthorne Gresford, which is 1843 to 1848. And then Lochinvar, which is 1864 to 1870. And it's very interesting to note that pretty much the same broad scale family, which involved the Glennies and Windhams and other things like that, were responsible for taking a lot of this data, particularly that in the Hunter Valley. But what I'm going to focus on today is the latest work we've been doing with Wollong, which is the vineyard site near Mount Vincent on the other side of Cessnock. We think this was a small vineyard and not particularly productive. It was originally owned by George Windham, who also owned Dalwood earlier, but I think in 1891 there was an economic crash, and either just before or just after that he sold Dalwood, but he returned. Wollong became a family home for the Windhams at that time. We don't know what the production output or the grape types were. I asked Julie McIntyre and she couldn't tell me either. And she said she'd be surprised if we found that information. Now, the key person involved in all of this is Marion Windham. She became very interested in weather observations beginning in 1891 when she was 18. She began to take records at the property. Perhaps she was influenced very strongly by the fact that she has considerable family weather history. There are relatives in different places. I mentioned Glennies earlier. There's a relative in South Carolina and a couple of other places in different parts of the world that were all involved taking weather history information. So she became linked into that and involved. We do not know what instruments were used. We do not know where the instruments were placed, but we're going to speculate on that in a minute. We are pretty sure that she was guided by H.C. Russell, who published in 1892, guides for instrument location and measurement for people on the land who were doing this kind of work. By this time, Russell, who was the New South Wales astronomer, had built up quite a network of meteorological observers, all of which were working in this area, but only really reported rainfall to him at Sydney at the observatory. Based on the information we had from his book, and a bit of guessing, I'll be honest with you. Wait a minute. The right-hand photo is the property looking toward the northwest, and that is the south side of the house. It's very difficult to see because this is such a fuzzy thing, but there is the south side of the house, and we think the instruments must have been placed on the veranda there. There's no evidence of any box, white box, which you would hopefully like to see, which we saw at Armadale at Eversley, that were used. And this was the alternative suggested by H.C. Russell. If you do not have a white box, place them on the veranda on the south side of the house, away from direct sunlight, with airflow, but no influences from things like wood heaters or individual heating and the location. Marion Windham was a very dedicated observer. We're in the process of developing a paper on this. I don't have time to get into that, but she became very forthright in terms of her interests, and she was very, very good in terms of her observations of the atmosphere. Now, we think Don is with us today. He's a direct descendant, Don Seton Wilkinson. We think this was Marion Windham, dressed in church finery, not exactly the best kind of clothes for the climate we're talking about, but still that's the way that it was at that time. Whoops. And these are examples of her records. The left one is November to December 1899, just one page. And this is another reason we're quite sure that she had direct information from H.C. Russell, because these books she were using were registers of meteorological information provided by the New South Wales astronomer itself, and after 1908 by the newly formed Bureau of Meteorology. And you can see, for the most part, her handwriting is quite neat and clear, and it made it fairly easy for the data people to transcribe into spreadsheets. And these are what she recorded, and this is from 1893 to 1928. So rainfall, pressure, minimum temperature, 9 o'clock temperature, max temperature, wind direction, etc. And the only thing that she did not take regular records of, which is very disappointing, was pressure. Likely the barometer was inside the house, but why this was not included in her regular records at 9 in the morning, except for short spurts and periods during that whole the whole set of years, we don't know. And these are some examples of, I hope you can read these. These are some examples of some of the daily descriptions she wrote in. We felt, or I felt certainly, that she had a very, very good knowledge of the atmosphere and how it worked. For example, on the 28th of May, 1898, she said, cirrostratus from the northwest, the wind blew very strongly all day and kept up through the night, quite mild. A little shower fell in the night from a windstorm. Wind changed more to west in the north, night, lightning in the evening. So she not only recorded her observations at 9 in the morning, she kept track of what was going on during the day. 22nd of February, 1922, cumulus, a beautiful bright day. Thunderbergs, white and handsome, appeared about 3 p.m. in the southeast, from which there was lightning after dark. Fresh sea breeze. Sorry, I am just recovering from COVID. Now, we can do several different things with this, and this is just one example. We took the yearly rainfall amount and compared the yearly rainfall amounts with the overall average for the whole period, and either subtracted a year. Look at the differences with these, and these are the anomalies, differences between the average. And what we see is probably not particularly generally surprising. This is the Federation drought period, particularly 1901 and 1902 were the very strong, heavy Federation drought periods in eastern New South Wales. That certainly appears in the record. There was further drought extension in 1905, 6, and 7. And over here during World War I, or just post-World War I, there's a period of post-World War I drought, which would be worth investigating a good deal more. Not because this not only shows up Wollong, it shows up in some of the other records like Armadale as well. So one of the things we can do with this is do some very detailed analysis of what these periods were, what happened at the property, and how that compared with other records that might be available in the Hunter Valley. Why did we stop in 1928? Because Marion Windham died in November 9th, 1928. And there's a big black note in the weather diary saying that Marion Windham has passed away. And there were no records taken for 2 or 3 days or 4 days after that. I have a personal link to this date. I was born exactly 16 years later. Never married, but an excellent example of an independent female dedicated to family life and weather observations. After her death, her descendants continued with weather measurements until the property was sold in the mid-1950s. Thus, we have the 1929 to 1956 data. So the 1929 to 1956 data is now all on spreadsheets and initially combined. We are going to need to have it quality assured by Linden in Melbourne before we can do much more in the way of analysis for that. But we have, from this whole data set, if you wanted to put it all together, quite a very good record from 1893, sorry, to 19, well, effectively the early 1950s. Effectively, that's it. I don't need to say very much more. It's just an update. I'm open to questions now if people are interested.
Any questions for Howard?
By the way, the idea of the TLC map concept is something I want to explore. We'll have to do some thinking about that, Johnny.
Okay.
Not sure how it would work with meteorological information, particularly with records so scattered around the area, but we'll see what happens.
Well, Hugh, that's something that we could flag to discuss.
Yeah.
Yeah, very happy to do that.
Okay. Thank you so much. And thank you, Howard. Hope you recover well. All right. Look, we've got 2 minutes. We could have squeezed in another presentation from Robert Watson. Robert, I don't know that you're going to fit it in 2 minutes though, are you?
I might go away, guys.
Okay. All right, Howard.
Thanks for the inputs.
Can you all see that?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. 1 minute.
Okay.
Okay. That's the 3-panel photo taken by Snowball in 1906 that Russell Rigby put together. And this was this extra plate we found in Melbourne, which I then added on to the left-hand end. And during the week, and that's the modern photo of the same image, and that's the Ralph Snowball and David Diem version. But during this week, I've been doing some work with Mark Rigby, and he found on Russell's computer an extra panel which shows the coal mine. And so although that's not crisp like from a glass negative, that's scanned out of a book, but nevertheless, we now have the 4th panel here from Melbourne, and this 5th panel over here, which shows the sea pit and the stack. So so we're looking pretty good, and I'm going to try and use Lost Newcastle to see if I can find anyone that's got the glass negative for this, or a really good quality print. But otherwise, I'm pretty happy that that's a good panorama. What do you think?
Fantastic. We might have to see it up close, but this was taken back in March, on the 22nd of March.
Yes.
And we have to thank the residents of Lemnos Parade
Yes.
that came forward and gave you the exact roof you needed to climb upon in order to do it. Is that right, Robert?
That's right. So the modern version, I've been talking to David Diem, and yeah, so you can see there's Mount Sugarloaf, and down here is the modern Mount Sugarloaf.
You might have to point to it because we can't see it. They're very small on our screen.
Oh, okay.
So you might have to click on them or something.
Okay,
anyway, look, we'll try and get them in.
I'll do a
higher
report
res.
anyhow.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all.
Thank you very much, Robert.
Okay.
And look, just letting everyone know, thank you for joining us today. We've got a few forthcoming announcements. Next Untitled Living Histories meeting is on the 1st of August. We've got the Fringe Histories call for blog posts. The July theme is, of course, Naidoc Week 2022. There's a book launch happening on the 7th of August on the Hunter Valley Ancestors by Rosalind Bannister. And thank you very much for attending. And anything else that people would like to add just before we shut down operations? Thank you to all the presenters, Professor Hugh Craig, Dr. Ros Kerr, Professor Howard Bridgeman, and Robert Watson. And Anne, thank you very much for looking after the presentations of those speakers. Anything else people would like to? Yes, Ron.
Just one quick thing, Johnny. A fellow that's working on the Newcastle baths brought up to the fort last week a World War I British War medal. We're trying to clean it up. It was buried in the bottom of the pool, and we've cleaned it up to the extent that we can have found that it's private. We've got private and JT on the edge of it, and the name is still fairly
obscured,
and only part of the service number is there as well. But we've got further cleaning to do, so maybe it'll improve. But
you might have to get yourself some Renaissance wax.
We've got all that. Yes,
you have. Okay, great.
Yeah. So we're working on that. But if anyone is aware of someone who lost it some particular time ago, the council worker and our people would be very interested to make contact with them.
Okay, great, Ron. Okay, any Amanda Hines from the National Trust? Do you have an update for us?
We haven't been that busy. We just rolled in really to the AGM was the major thing that we had on this month, which we had at Tomago House with great attendance. And one of the members on here, Ian Eckford, was our guest speaker and did a fabulous presentation on Christchurch Cathedral. So we're very lucky to have him. And yeah, that was the major thing. I was going to mention about Roland Bannister's book, which you've already done. And we've just got ongoing involvement with a number of properties around the Hunter, but nothing too big.
Thank you very much, Amanda. And any updates from the City of Newcastle reps?
Hi, Johnny.
Kerry, are you
Kerry,
there? That's it.
yeah.
Great. I can't always see everyone, so thank you. I stab in the dark.
I think what I initially think our drag queen exhibition will be launching on the 8th of July, and there is a podcast to go with that and an event that will all be on our website within the next day or two. So that's going to be good.
Sorry, Kerry, I just missed the exhibition.
Yeah, exhibitions in the Magic Box, and that will launch on the 8th of July.
Okay, 8th of July.
And the podcast will drop at the same time, and then there will be an event later in the month. If you wish to learn how to do drag queen makeup, please come along. So it should be good fun. I'm part of I think it's Binary awareness week. I think I'm mentoring somebody through the exhibition this time. It's not mine. So yeah, other than that, it's just business as usual ticking over. So feel free to check the online collections for new stuff, because there's new stuff every week.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kerry. And thank you all for being here, and we'll see you next month.